Welcome to my YouTube playlist. This is the second video in this series, and in many ways probably the most important and significant. What we're trying to do here is define the problem related to climate change that's facing us, and basically it's the fact that we emit 50 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions from the burning of fossil fuels every year. So in terms of problems, in terms of complexity and urgency, this is probably the biggest one that humanity has ever faced. So let's get into the detail. I'm going to use this one chart from Our World in Data. This data that this one represents is available from many sources, but I like the way Hannah Ritchie from Our World in Data kind of lays it out in a very intuitive way, and I think it tells the story really well. So essentially this is just showing the amount of greenhouse gas emissions in gigatons, which is a million tons. So this corresponds to the 50 billion tons I just mentioned a few moments ago. And then it's a function of time, going from the 1990s through the end of the 21st century, 2100. So let's start with the easy part first, and that's that black line on the left-hand side. And that really just is historical emissions that we've measured over time. So there's no statistical or very little statistical spread. We know what that data is with a high degree of certainty. Now, where this begins to get a little tricky in understanding is all those colored curves out to the right, from the current time going forward. Those are based on predictive models or warming scenarios. And in another video, I'll go into a lot more detail about where this data is coming from and who's doing it. But for now, let's just look at the data and try to wrap our arms around what's going on. So the first one I want to look at is the pledges and targets, that green line down towards the bottom. And you'll see that it denotes 2.1 degrees centigrade. So what does that mean? Well, currently today, our best estimate is that we are 1.1 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial global average. So that from that time, probably the early 1900s, the climate has warmed 1.1 degrees Celsius. Now, if you're a Fahrenheit person, you can just multiply all these numbers by 2. That gets you close enough. But the key number to recall is that as of today, we've warmed about 1.1 degrees centigrade. Now, back to the pledges and targets. That comes from the Paris Agreement, which again I'll cover in a subsequent video to talk about exactly what that is and what those targets are. But if we were to abide by those targets that were established in 2015 and ratified in 2016, we would get to 2.1 degrees Celsius above the global mean temperature of the pre-industrial temperature. So that's a full degree Celsius warmer than where we are today. Now, the orange, the current policies, puts us between 2.5 and 2.9 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average. And it puts us in the danger zone for sure, because anything above about 3 degrees and that 3 to 5 degree warming above the average prior to burning fossil fuels puts us in a very tough spot globally, and I'll explain a little bit about that later as well. Now the red bars at the top, the one that's got the greatest degree of depth, that's if we have no policies at all. If we're just doing everything the cheapest, fastest, simplest way, the way we've always done things, we'll get to somewhere above 4 degrees centigrade Celsius above the pre-industrial global mean temperature. And that puts us in serious danger. Now, the reason that one is so broad compared to the others is because the people that are doing the modeling, they're making a lot of many different assumptions. And so, as I'll show you in video 3, there's about 26 different research centers that are doing this modeling in these scenarios, these predictions, and you know, some of them are looking at slightly different set of assumptions, and so the variability in that one is greater than the others. And to that same point, the pledges and target ones has the least amount of variability because that's what we said we would do, and so there's no ambiguity in the assumptions. That's what we agreed to globally and said we would do. Now, notice that these emissions over time as we go into the future are starting to dip down a little bit, and I mean that's a good thing, but I'll explain a little bit more detail why that's not nearly sufficient, and that'll come in one of the next videos in the series. So stick with me and I'll explain some of the things behind this particular chart. But the key takeaway is that our current trajectory is putting us at about 2.7 degrees centigrade Celsius above the pre-industrial average, and recognize that today we're already at 1.1. So that's going to be more than double the impact that we're already seeing. Let's take a look at the scorecard just for the US alone. And this comes from the Global Action Tracker. You can basically track the progress of any country, and there's 196 countries that are involved in the Paris Agreement and the Climate Change Initiative. But this data is just an example of how the US is doing. And you'll recognize these numbers from the graphic that I showed just previously. So we can see that light blue, the 2.1 degree Celsius, that was what was agreed to at the Paris Agreement in 2016. And that would put us, like it says, about 2.1 degrees Celsius above the global mean temperature, or about another degree above where we are today. The teal, the little bit darker blue that shows the 2.7, I mentioned that too in the previous chart. And that is, what's happening there is we made agreements and we said we would do this, but we're slipping. We're not living up to the things that we said that we would do, and the United States is certainly not alone in this action or inaction. But because we're slipping, now the more probable outcome is that we're going to get to 2.7 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average, and so that's not good. The more that we slip, the higher that goes, and it's unforgiving. It doesn't care about our politics, about our economics. It's just a simple case of, if we keep emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere unchecked and not meeting our commitments, we're just going to continue to go up and up on that thermometer. That's how critical this is. This is a more detailed scorecard for the United States, and again, there's one of these for every participating country, but you can clearly see that to date our actions are insufficient to meet the goals that we've agreed that we would target. And so that's kind of going from left to right. The orange box in the middle there just says our policies and actions are insufficient. Where for whatever political and economic reasons we're not meeting our commitments. And then you see a yellow box and another orange box. One says that they're NDC targets. And the difference in those two is NDC just means nationally developed contribution. So, we came up with these numbers, not somebody else giving them to us. And so the yellow one is basically what we're doing within the United States. And the good news is we're almost meeting our targets there. But the other one, the one that says insufficient and is orange, that's a complicated one, because part of this overarching agreement is the rich nations, the wealthy nations, made agreements to have funds to help the poorer nations. And we're not meeting those agreements. So we're doing better domestically than we are internationally. And I have to remind you again that it doesn't matter if the United States succeeds. If all the other countries don't succeed, it's not going to matter. Everybody, all the countries in the world have to meet their targets in order to meet the overall goal. And that's what makes this so daunting. And then you can see the gray box there on the right side, which basically just said our resource, critically insufficient. We're not coughing up enough dollars to meet the needs that we have. So down at the bottom, there is an item that talks about the net zero target for 2050. That's when we agreed to get to net zero. But I don't want to cover net zero and what that means today. We'll do that later. Anyway, that is an overall summary of what the problem is. It's a huge problem. There's no margin for error. We have to take action. We have to do it now. We can't delay any further. It's a big deal, and we need to stay after it. So thanks again for tuning into my YouTube playlist. You can see the link below for the rest of it, and the rest of the initial playlist really dives into the details of what's behind a lot of the information that I just showed in this one. Thanks for tuning in.